Thank you very much. Thank you all very much for joining us. Let me introduce the participants who were at the table. To my far left, Alfonso David, who is my counsel in the governor's office. Speaker of the Assembly, Carl Hastie. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. Assembly member Nick Perry, who's also head of the Caucus. And Alvin Bragg, who's the Executive Deputy Attorney General for Social Justice and has been designated by the Attorney General as the prosecutor to handle these cases. I want to thank my colleagues in the Assembly and the Senate who came today. We had probably one of the most robust meetings in terms of attendance of any meeting we've had outside of Albany. And we just had a very good conversation. And the conversation is about the criminal justice system, and specifically the special prosecutor process that is now underway. Probably one of the most serious issues that we faced over this past year as a government, as a legislative body, as an executive, is the loss of faith in the criminal justice system. And that's really what it is at the end of the day. We've had a series of incidents where we have seen people die at the hands of the criminal justice system. There have been many questions, and it's not one case or two cases, it's 3 cases, 4 cases, 5 cases, and ... connect the dots, and it starts to show a line and it starts to show a pattern. We had from Sean Bell to Eric Garner here in New York. We've seen them all across the country. So it's not a New York-specific idea. And the final result is a lack of trust of the criminal justice system, especially among some members of the minority community, and an apparent or real conflict between the DAs and the police. The district attorneys and the police work very closely together. And there is a very real sense that that relationship does not allow objectivity. Now, conflicts can be actual, can be real, or it can be a perceived conflict. Either way, it is a conflict. And this conflict, I think, has fomented a breach of trust between the public and the police system. And the relationship doesn't work without trust. The symbol for justice is Lady Justice, the old Roman goddess, and she's wearing a blindfold and holding the scales. Why the blindfold? Because justice is supposed to be blind. It doesn't matter who you are, who you work for, color of your skin, how much money you have. Justice is blind, and justice is fair. And people are questioning that result. What we did during the legislative session was we tried to pass a bill that would establish a special prosecutor's office. We were unable to come up with an agreement between the Assembly and the Senate. I said that if we didn't have a piece of legislation passed, I would appoint the Attorney General, and that's just what I did. I first want to thank and applaud the Attorney General for stepping up to this task. This is not an easy task. These are very difficult cases. They are cases that tend to polarize, so politically they're problematic. And I want to applaud the Attorney General for accepting the responsibility. The first deployment of that responsibility is a case that the Attorney General recently decided to pursue, which is the case of Raynette Turner in Mount Vernon, which is in Westchester, which is a 42-year-old mother of 8 who was arrested for shoplifting. She was incarcerated. Reports in the paper say she became ill and was ill in her cell. She was taken for medical care, returned to her cell, and she died while in police custody. And there are obvious questions. How does this happen? How does a person arrested for shoplifting wind up dying? If she was that ill, why was she left in the cell? And these questions have to be answered. And I think this is a perfect example of the deployment of the Attorney General as special prosecutor. You want these questions answered in a way that the community feels they actually heard the truth, and the truth comes from a disinterested, objective party. And that's what the Attorney General is. So I think he made exactly the right decision on the Raynette Turner case. I think it vindicates our approach. That was the discussion with my colleagues in the Assembly and the Senate, and I think it's fair to say that they agree. We're excited about this accomplishment. The more I have a chance to work with it, the more I'm committed to it. I think the legislature is happy with it, and I'll let them speak for themselves, but I think it affirms our approach. And I also think it's one of those situations where people look to New York to lead. Well, New York is leading. And I think this is going to be an approach that winds up showing other states across the country that the best way to deal with this problem is to build trust. The best way to build trust is to be able to say someone is handling these cases who is disinterested and 100% objective. And that's what we've done here in New York, and that's what I think other states should do. With that, let me turn it over to the Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman.
Thank you, Governor. The Governor issued an executive order in early July. The next day, because we'd obviously been having discussions about this, I announced the creation of a new unit in the Attorney General's office, a Special Investigation and Prosecutions Unit that is being headed up by Alvin Bragg, who is the head of one of my divisions now. He is an extraordinary lawyer. He will lead a team that's going to do the most thorough, independent, and impartial job possible in each of these cases. And we appreciate the political challenges that the governor and the legislative leaders face in Albany. The Special Investigations and Prosecutions Unit is set up to go as long as we have to go until you can get some real reforms done. But I have to note that, first of all, this is a national model. There's no other state that has done this. The governor has taken action that may very well be followed by other states, and I hope it is in the future. We've added, since the original executive order, a conforming order, making it clear that the first case we're taking on is the case of Raynette Turner. Neither Alvin or I or anyone in our office are going to talk about any specifics of any case, but as a general matter, we can say that there's a big difference in arguing about this issue in the abstract and arguing about it when you actually have an incident. These cases are tragedies, and my experience has been that in the Raynette Turner case, everyone who we've dealt with, including the Westchester County DA in turning the case over, has been totally professional. And it's one thing to say you disagree with the concept of the Attorney General superseding district attorneys. It's another thing when you've actually got someone who dies under these circumstances. Everyone has been proceeding professionally, and we can promise you that we will do this as thoroughly as possible and try to be as clear as possible in communicating what we've done and why after the investigation is complete. And with that, I want to introduce someone who's provided a lot of leadership and efforts to reform in this area for a very long time, the Speaker of the Assembly, Carl Heastie.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. First, let me thank the governor for his leadership. As I said when he first made this executive order, that not only was he showing his leadership here in the state of New York, but he was actually showing leadership in the entire nation. As it was commented, we tried to negotiate a total package around criminal justice reform. We weren't able to do that. And in those discussions with the governor, as he had proclaimed that if we weren't able to come to an agreement, that he would appoint the Attorney General. And one of the reasons why that was, I guess, a relief or okay with us is, number one, we passed the bill granting this power to the Attorney General. The Senate didn't take action. But further, it was just the confidence that we have in the Attorney General that if we're really looking at trying to restore public confidence, to make sure that there's no conflicts of interest, I don't think we could have a finer person to do that and to restore the public confidence than the Attorney General that we have. And then with that being said, speaking for my colleagues in the Assembly, we're going to continue and into next year and into the future to continue to do a top-down review to reform the criminal justice system. But in the interim, this is something that I think that our constituents have asked us for. I think this is something that's sorely needed, and hopefully, other states around the country will look at what Governor Cuomo did here and hopefully take on that leadership of it until we're able to act, and then until the federal government is able to act. So since I just mentioned the federal government, let me segue into introducing a former colleague of ours in the Assembly who is making us all very proud down in Washington. I had it wrong. In Washington, who, actually was probably, while he was there, one of the finest debaters, on the floor, and that's none other than our wonderful Congressman from Brooklyn, Hakeem Jeffries.
I thank my good friend and the distinguished Speaker of the State of New York for his leadership, for his introduction. Certainly thank the Governor and the Attorney General, my other colleagues in government here today. This action taken by the Governor will restore confidence in the criminal justice system here in New York State, but it will also resonate all across the country. We have a national problem with respect to the rising tide of police-involved killings, particularly as it impacts unarmed African-American men in this nation. And there's an additional problem with the reality that far too often when unarmed African-American men or others are killed in a police encounter, police officers are often held unaccountable for crossing the line. That shakes the confidence in the criminal justice system. And the action that's taken today by the Governor, or that has been taken by the Governor and implemented with such tremendous leadership by the Attorney General, will help restore confidence in just a full, fair, and impartial investigation. When I was in Congress, I was struck by the number of people on both sides of the aisle, Democrats, Republicans, blacks, whites, Latinos, Asians, conservatives, progressives, people from all across the country who were just shocked at the apparent miscarriage of justice that took place in the aftermath of the Eric Garner tragedy. Eric Garner, of course, was an unarmed African-American man targeted, it appeared, for selling loose cigarettes. He did not resist arrest. On 11 different occasions, he said, "I can't breathe." 11 different times, the officers who were there to protect and serve appeared to not respond to that cry for help. Medical examiner ruled his death a homicide. Chokehold that was used had been administratively banned by the police department for more than 20 years, and yet not a single charge was brought by the district attorney. And in many ways, it highlighted for those that I represent throughout the communities I serve in Brooklyn and Queens, as well as for many of my colleagues down in Washington who are on the Judiciary Committee and beyond, that there just is an inherent conflict of interest as it relates to the likelihood of a fair and impartial and comprehensive investigation in every instance of a police-involved killing. And a year later, in the aftermath of the death of Eric Garner, we know that Eric Garner is dead. The individual that took the video of his death himself is under indictment. The police officer responsible for the death of Eric Garner is still on the job, and the prosecutor, who in my view presided over the miscarriage of justice, has gotten a promotion to the United States Congress. There was something wrong with that picture, and it rocks the confidence of the criminal justice system. And that's why the action that has been taken by the Governor in a bold and courageous way and implemented with a level of dignity and professionalism by the Attorney General is so important to the fundamental integrity of our system of justice. And I commend the Governor and the Attorney General for his action, the Speaker, and all of my colleagues for their leadership. And lastly, before I introduce our next speaker, I have the honor and privilege of being here today, not just as a member of the United States Congress, but on behalf of the National Urban League, who have conferred upon this governor the Crusader for Racial Justice Award. And so I just want to present this to Governor Andrew Cuomo, my good friend, who has not just talked the talk, but he's walked the walk as it relates to dealing with some of the challenges that we've got in our criminal justice system. And I'm here today, as I indicated, to suggest that this is not just an action taken for the people of the state of New York, but it will have a profound impact all across the country as we continue to debate these issues. And that's why the National Urban League has recognized this step as so significant. And I'm proud on their behalf to confer this award to our governor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. With that, we'll go to Assemblyman Nick Perry, who's also head of the caucus. Assemblyman?
Thank you, Governor. On behalf of my colleagues, all the members of the caucus, I just take the opportunity to extend our sympathy and our prayers to the Turner family, especially to the 8 children who lost their mother. And I want to thank the governor and for his boldness in taking this step. It's monumental. It's extremely important to us as members of the caucus. The communities we represent will be grateful for a long time. And in the future, when we can get a result other than the continuing tragedy of the Staten Island Garner case, we will be able to better measure the value of what the governor has done. So for the future, this is historic. This case in Westchester may not vote overtly suggest that there was any misconduct. There's still a lot of questions to be answered, a lot of information that we need to ascertain. And but my colleagues and I, we are quite sure that the Attorney General will prosecute this case, that he will investigate and bring the truth out. You know, the whole nation, New York City, New York State, is on high alert because of so many cases where the truth has been left hidden, never comes to light in cases like this. We are going to stay on alert and on guard and trust our Attorney General to uncover all the truth. There are lots of questions that needs to be answered in this case. Why was Renette Turner held for so long on a misdemeanor? Where is the video from the camera located right outside the cell in which she died? Why did the police not offer her medical assistance following her falling ill at the courthouse? Rather, they placed her in another cell and didn't check on her for over an hour when she was subsequently found dead. Why is there no record of her visiting the Montefiore Hospital while in custody the night before she died? Most people arrested on the same day that she was held was arraigned on Monday. However, Turner was never scheduled for court as prosecutors did not have all of the police paperwork from her arrest. Her name had never even been placed on the court calendar for Monday's session. Why? Those are some questions that we expect to get quick answers after a thorough investigation by the district attorney. We look forward to the truth coming to light, and we stand firmly with the governor and support this appointment, which we know was the right thing to do and a good thing for a state and a model for a nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Assemblyman. I also want to thank Congressman Jeffries and the National Urban League. I do believe this is an important national conversation, as we've all been seeing on the news channels. But I also think we understand the problem. We have to get to a solution, and we think this is a possible solution. And we're proud of the way it's proceeding in New York, and we're looking forward to the discussion with other states. Let me also thank all the assemblymen and senators who joined us today. And it's a fairly lengthy list, but it's an important group. And with your indulgence, I want to thank Senator Comrie, Senator Espaillat, Senator Rivera, Senator DeLon, Assemblyman Blake, Crespo, Pichardo, Michaela Salages, Assemblywoman Bichotte, Assemblywoman Davila, Assemblywoman Kimberly Jean-Pierre, Assemblyman Ron Kim, Assemblyman Guillermo Linares, Assemblywoman Neely Rosick, Assemblywoman Michelle Titus, Assemblywoman Latrice Walker, Assemblyman Keith Wright, who has been working on this issue for many, many years, moved the bill to this effect 15 years ago, with many of his colleagues, Assemblywoman Vivian Cook, Assemblywoman Roxanne Prasad, Assemblyman Walter Mosley, Assemblyman Jeff Aubrey, who is probably our resident expert in criminal justice issues, Assemblywoman Latoya Joyner. So I want to thank them as well as the Speaker and my counsel and Mr. Bragg, Nick Perry, and certainly the Attorney General. Any questions on this topic? Please feel free. Don't be shy. Not that you ever are.
Hamilton from Political New York. This is actually for the Congressman. In the event that the cases the Attorney General ends up reviewing and looking into, they don't end up resulting in any sort of noticeable difference in prosecutions or indictments, what does that mean for you in terms of your statement that there's been a conflict of issues from local district attorneys? Does that change anything for you if that ends up being the case?
Well, I'm confident that over time we will see a noticeable difference both in perception and reality as it relates to the integrity of these type of prosecutions, just because of the real inherent conflict of interest that exists between police officers and local prosecutors. Local prosecutors rely on the police department each and every day to make their cases. And that's why, even in the absence of malice, it's very difficult in many instances to believe that aggressive prosecutions can take place in instances where it appears that police officers cross the line. I think similar to the model that exists at the federal level, where often you see the Department of Justice step in, there will be a belief, regardless of whether that investigation results in a prosecution, that the inquiry was fairer and more legitimate because of the distance that exists, in this case, between the Attorney General as well as and the police department. I would also point out, lastly, that what's important about what the governor has done in this particular instance, as compared to the normal case where when there's a failure to prosecute or indict by a local district attorney's office and the Department of Justice steps in, is that the threshold in those cases is so much higher because of the need to demonstrate that someone's civil rights were violated, that often those investigations don't lead to convictions. In this particular instance, the prosecutions can be brought on the basis of state law, holding police officers to the same standard as every other citizen.
Also to the Congressman, you alluded to the promotion of Prosecutor Dan Donovan, the prosecutor in the Eric Garner case. Do you feel that he was undeserving of that promotion, given his performance in the Eric Garner case?
Well, I don't want to comment on the decision that was made by the people of Staten Island and southern Brooklyn at this particular point. My views have been well known as it relates to the miscarriage of justice that I believe took place as it relates to the grand jury proceedings. Congressman Donovan at this point is a colleague. There's a very active conversation that's underway in Washington, D.C., trying to fix our broken criminal justice system, deal with the problem of mass incarceration, strengthen the relationship between the police and the community. New York State, led by the governor and the attorney general, are actually leading the way now in that conversation. I'm hopeful that Daniel Donovan will be a partner in his new role in that conversation down in Washington.
For the governor or for the attorney general, I understand you can't talk so much about specifics, but I'm interested to know how the Rainer case is proceeding the investigation, and anything to tell us about why it's the ideal case to begin with.
Excuse me, why, what?
The ideal first case, yeah.
I have to say again, I want to emphasize that the governor's executive order was not based on any reference or suggestion of misconduct by a single district attorney. It was based on the need to restore public confidence because there is a crisis in public confidence. It was so that he was very clear about that. Since we have spoken to the district attorneys, and 2 days after the order was issued, I went to the annual district attorneys conference and was with them, and we had a robust conversation. We've received 3 calls for 3 possible cases. The first 2 turned out not to be cases that fell within our jurisdiction. But again, the big difference in arguing about this in the abstract and arguing about it when you actually have a case where someone is shot or otherwise killed. And the district attorneys have all proceeded professionally, and we have superseded the district attorney in Westchester County, received full cooperation, and are proceeding forward with this as we would with any investigation. We're not going to comment on the specifics, but Alvin Bragg is the special deputy to head up the Special Investigations and Prosecutions Unit. He has a team of very seasoned prosecutors from around the state, and we have the Attorney General's office. We have offices all over the state of New York, and investigators who are very well trained and seasoned also. So we're proceeding as we would with any investigation. We take this mandate very, very seriously, and we take the statements in the governor's executive order of the need to restore public confidence very seriously. So we'll be proceeding impartially, thoroughly, and independently. We're not going to comment on any specific facts, but we were putting everything we got into this, and I'm sure that we will get it whatever happened.
And I think whatever the answer will be, it will be a credible answer, right? Because the Attorney General has no conflict of interest, nothing, no real conflict, no perceived conflict. He has his own investigators. So the local police won't be relied on in this case. So credibility. And that's what this has been all about, credibility of the answer. Everyone understood the question. It's the credibility and thoroughness of the answer. Anything else on this? I have one update on the, if there are no other questions on this, I have an update on the Legionella testing that we did over the weekend. We are sampling about 50 buildings. Thus far, we found out, just as we've been here, about 3 buildings tested positive. So that's an additional 3. These buildings are outside the quote-unquote impact area that was initially tested. So we will then be extending our testing because obviously it's outside the area and obviously there are more buildings. Let me also add this. To the building owners, at this point, this has gone on for a number of days. I think this is the height of irresponsibility for a building owner that has a cooling tower to not have checked the cooling tower by now or treated the cooling tower by now. We offered last week free testing by the state, so there's not even a cost involved. This is routine and regular maintenance. Biocide is added to clean the cooling system. People are getting sick, people are dying. Building owners who are not complying, I believe, will face legal consequences and legal liability. We're going to continue testing. And again, I urge every building owner, for reasons of ethics and legal reasons, to attend to their cooling towers immediately. This is a statewide problem. I know we have a very serious outbreak in the Bronx, but it's not just New York City. We have it in Rockland County. We have it up north. One of the things I'm going to speak to my legislative colleagues about is new regulations and laws that govern this matter, because this can't happen again. We have to have a statewide system, statewide protocols. So if you own a building in Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, or Nassau, you have the same protocol, and this just can't happen again. And if building owners are not going to take it on themselves to do the right thing and take corrective action, then the state will. Any other questions?
As you know, the number of cases has now deaths have gone up to 12. Cases are about 117. That's almost a 10% increase in the last 5 years. I understand there's a lag time for diagnosis, but are you confident that the city has a handle on this? As you know, part of this perception is the city disseminating information to the residents of the Bronx in a timely like that.
I am not, Zach, in a position to comment on what the cities have done, right? This is not just New York City. There are other local governments that are dealing with this. And I don't think it's my place to comment on how the local governments have done. I do think I'm responsible for the state's action. And obviously the state incorporates all the areas that you mentioned. And I am comfortable with the state's action. I think we have been aggressive. I think the aggressiveness was called for. It's one of the matters I spoke to my colleagues about before we came down, the Assembly and Senators who were here. It was a very dramatic action by the state, and I think we all agree that it was exactly what was called for. We've also disseminated information to people within the community to inform them about what this is, what the Legionella bacteria is, where it comes from, symptoms, how they should be treated. But we will continue to ramp up our efforts until we have this situation under control and limited. And then we'll come up with reforms to make sure this doesn't happen again. But it's not for me, Zach, to say if Rockland is appropriate or what the other local governments are doing. You have local governments, you have the state government, and you have the federal government, and each one should answer for themselves. Sir?
Let me ask, first, do you have the addresses of the 3 buildings that tested positive with the names of those buildings? The first part of the question. The second question, is the protocol that you envision for the state going to be fundamentally different anyway than the protocol followed by the city in attacking this problem?
Yeah, I don't know what the city is proposing. I do want to have a statewide protocol. I don't want to have different protocols in different cities. So if you own a building in Albany, you do one thing. If you own a building in New York City, you do something else. If you own a building in Nassau, you do something else. We should just come up with the best protocol, and that becomes the statewide protocol.
And how will that differ from the city's protocol and how it's handled so far?
I don't know what the city's protocol is, so I don't know how it would be different than the city's protocol, but I do want to have one uniform statewide protocol. I don't have the addresses. You know everything I know because I was handed a note while I was here.
Mr. Governor, would you consider supporting a primary challenge to Mayor de Blasio in a couple of years?
Let's stick to government matters right now.
The mayor just announced at his news conference that 2 buildings tested positive since Saturday. Is there not sharing of the information? I mean, what accounts for the difference in the numbers being given?
I do not know. Does anybody know?
That was information that I was literally just handed as we were standing here.
This is, the 3 are from the state testing.
Governor, with all due respect, how could you issue statewide, regulations about cooling towers without knowing what the city regulations are?
Oh, no, we will. Before the state acts, we'll look at what all local governments are doing. Some local governments right now have a registry, and New York City doesn't. Others do. Some have a testing regimen, others don't. So we will look at what all the local governments are doing. This is how the state makes a law or the state makes a regulation. You look at what everybody's doing, you take the best model, and you make that the statewide application.
Sir, does that mean that the state regulations won't come to the next legislative session?
No, we can do regulations without legislation. Legislation, we need our partners in the legislature, which is always a pleasure to go to the legislature for legislation. And whenever I get a chance, sometimes I just pass legislation for the enjoyment of passing legislation. But if I'm not interested in the enjoyment at that moment, we can issue regulations. Isn't that right, Mr. Speaker?
Sure thing.
Just clarify the testing, because the city says, it's been testing hundreds of sites and the state has been too. Are the city and state collaborating on this? As they
Yes,
their numbers
yes.
down theirs, or
They
is
give
it,
us,
different sites, different-
they have given us, they have a universe they tested, we have a universe they tested, and we're sharing information and we're collaborating on the testing. They asked us to test an additional 62 sites. That has all been done. We had a big number tested over the weekend. The tests are now being done on a rolling basis. So you get information on a rolling basis as they're working down this list of several hundred tests. And where we were a few minutes ago was 3 tested positive, but they're still going through the tests. So it's possible that you have more. Okay?
Channel 4 reported about a mom panhandling on the street with babies, and we documented what seems to be an organized effort by these mothers. Just get your reaction to that, of parents using their babies to beg for their money on the streets?
Yeah, obviously, if that were true, using their baby, I don't know what that means. But we have very strict laws on the books and regulations about a parent's responsibility to care for their child and about the welfare of their child. So if a parent is not acting in the best interest of the child or protecting the welfare of the child, then that certainly would violate the law. Sir?
Question about the Gateway project and the funding for it, and I'm curious to hear from you why you were willing to take out loans to pay for the Tappan Zee Bridge, but not for the Gateway project.
Because the Tappan Zee Bridge is a state bridge. LaGuardia Airport is a New York State airport. LaGuardia Airport, by the way, is about $4 billion, and that's not a cost to the state. It's actually less to the state and to the port because it's primarily privately funded. You're talking about $14 billion for the Gateway Tunnel. You're talking to about double the Tappan Zee and LaGuardia combined. So it is an impossibility that the state could finance it, or the port could finance it, or that Jersey could finance it. Number 2, it's not my tunnel. Why don't you pay for it? It's not my tunnel. It is an Amtrak tunnel that is used by Amtrak and by New Jersey Transit. So the federal government says it's an essential tunnel. They happen to be right because it's the Amtrak Northeast Corridor. So yes, we have to fix the tunnel. Yes, I'm very eager to fix the tunnel. There's no moral, legal, or ethical reason why the state should be looked at to fund it, or the states, plural, New Jersey and New York. The federal government said they would provide funding, and it turns out they would provide a loan, and no more than a loan. My problem is not the loan. My problem is repaying the loan. So I don't need a mortgage to buy the house. I need money to pay the mortgage. Are we clear on that point? Thank you very much.